Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lead Organizing Skills for Grassroots Advocates. I'm Ari Conrad, the Manager of Grassroots Advocacy here at NCJW. I use they, them pronouns, and I'll be managing this training and running the back-end tech side today. We are very excited that you are able to join us. LEAD is our monthly webinar series that focuses on a different organizing and advocacy skill every month. So be sure to check back often in future months to see what we're doing. And you can also find our previous recordings on our website. We'll include the link in our follow-up email so you can check out the past webinars that we've done. The time is the same every month, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we always record the trainings. I'll do a few housekeeping notes, but keep in mind if it's a smaller group, there might be opportunities to unmute and have conversation throughout, and we'll let you know when that is. In the meantime, we're going to ask that you please mute yourself when you're not speaking. There's also a chat box, which I'll drop these notes into so it'll pop up and you'll see. And feel free to write down any questions or comments and drop them in the chat box throughout the training, and we can make sure to get to them as well. Also reach out to me at aconrad, A-C-O-N-R-A-D at NCJW if you have any technical issues, but do note limited capacity during the webinar, but I will try my best to connect with you. And a gentle reminder that we are recording the webinar and we'll upload it to our website after and include the link in our follow-up email. So all of that, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our facilitators for this month. We are very thrilled to be joined again by Avoda. They did the first part of this training in February, of which we'll also include the link so you can watch that if you weren't able to join us for that one. And this is the second part. We're joined by the Alumni Director, Rachel Glicksman, and the Alumni Justice Ambassador, Katie Joseph, for the second part of this two-part series. So now I am going to kick it over to Rachel and Katie.
Great, thanks Ari for that intro. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Wonderful, so it's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I was on 2 months ago with my colleague Rabbi Danya Rettenberg, and we talked, as you might know, if you either were on or saw, on this topic of passion and vision in social change. And we did some work on our visions and sort of where you're heading as a section or individually, and did some work on different methods of social change. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to first say, as by way of intro, Ari said, I'm Rachel Glicksman. I'm Avoda's Alumni Director. I was also an Avoda core member about 10 years ago. And Avoda, for those who aren't familiar, is a Jewish social justice leadership training program. We have a few different programs, including our service corps. Both Katie and I are both alums of that program, where we place young Jews, 21 to 26, in full-time anti-poverty nonprofits. They live communally, and we do Jewish and social justice educational programming. And I was a participant in New Orleans, and I know Katie was a participant in New York. And Katie, do you want to say any words of intro of yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. It's great to be with you. As Rachel said, I also was an Avoda alum and had a really phenomenal experience with the program, and it put me in large part on the path to the work that I do now. I am the Policy and Legislative Advisor at Interfaith Alliance, a national nonprofit that works on advancing a progressive vision of religious freedom and ensuring that everyone can live out their values without imposing their beliefs on others. So it's a busy time these days, but I am very, very happy to be with you, and always a pleasure to work with NCJW.
I'll say that both Katie and I were part of an Avoda cohort last week at the Washington Institute with NCJW, and I know I speak for both of us that we were really excited to have that opportunity and to be continuing to build the relationship between Avoda and NCJW, which both are great organizations helping to build Jewish leaders and create change in our world. So we're excited to continue doing that work today by by building on the work of sort of thinking about how do we create change, what are the different methods in which we can create change, and thinking particularly today, we're going to dig into the relationship piece. So on the last session, we talked about various methods of social change. And no worries if you weren't on it or didn't see it. These were a few of the methods we talked about: direct service, community organizing, philanthropy, advocacy, social entrepreneurship, education, and political and or social mobilization. So we talked about how there are many different ways to create change. And we delved into a little bit about the pros and cons or benefits and drawbacks of each one, understanding that in a movement to create change, as we're all in together, we need all of these different methods. And so when we talked a little bit about how they create or shift power, and that some of them can kind of, we talked a little bit about direct service, for example, can meet immediate needs, but doesn't necessarily prevent the cause of the issue, whereas things like advocacy, and I know we were all, or those of us at the Washington Institute were part of that work, help to change things on a policy or legislative level that sometimes can get at the root causes of issues. And all of these methods together in combination with one another can help to work to create a movement for social justice that we're all working towards. And one of we really talked and we got into a great conversation about power and how that plays into it, and how can we change the status quo. And the layer that we want to talk about today is, what is the role of relationship? Because I think, for me, at least in my experience in social justice work, that is the place where any of these methods can help to change and shift power and change and shift status quo, dependent on how we build relationships around that. So I think, let me see. So just to, for anyone who is on, or for anyone who has been doing social justice work, which I think is all of us on here, I'm curious if folks want to type into the chat box, what are some of the ways you've been using these methods or others to accomplish your visions of social change? So if you're doing direct service, if you've been doing advocacy, if you've been doing some organizing work, maybe you're part of philanthropy, of giving money to different change work. So put into the chat box, and I'll put these methods up. What are some of the ways you've been using these methods to create change? I know while folks are typing, I'll say that many of us were part of the Washington Institute, where we were doing advocacy work, and I know that's a huge part of NCJW's work. And I also know I was really inspired to hear about many of the different other methods of social change that many sections are using. So anyone want to either type in, or actually, since we're a small group, if you want to unmute and just share a little bit about what are you doing? What kinds of methods are you using? Do you have service organizations? Katie says direct service, connecting with the DC Diaper Bank. And again, feel free to unmute if you want to just speak up and share a little bit about what kind of change work are you doing. Attending rallies, awesome. And I think attending rallies is sort of the political and social mobilization, can also be part of advocacy work. So as I spoke about, all of the methods are can come together in many of our things. Anyone else attending rallies or doing other sorts of change work? Lindsay says, I'd like to touch many methods of work, advocacy, organizing, and education. At home, I volunteer as a mentor with YWCA, and have volunteered on a local farm. So we've got direct service, mentoring, maybe as part of education work as well. Great. So I'm going to keep us moving along, and we'll keep talking about the different methods that everyone's using throughout. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk a little bit about adding this layer of relationship.
Awesome. Thank you. I love the idea of Lindsay volunteering on a farm. I would love to hear about that at some point. I think that's a really fun way to participate in direct service work. But it's, as Rachel said, it's so good to see so many folks who attended the Washington Institute and some new faces on the call, and to have this opportunity to learn together with so many powerful Jewish leaders and advocates from around the country. So in this section of our discussion, we'll frame our understanding of what it means, particularly to be a leader in social change, and the significance of placing relationships at the heart of our work. So to start us off, how many folks have heard the name Marshall Ganz before? So I see some heads shaking, I see some heads nodding. That's about what I would expect. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Ganz. So he has spent decades organizing in and researching social movements in the United States. He started out as an organizer with the civil rights movement. He did a lot of work with the United Farm Workers in the 60s and 70s. And since then, he's been advising unions and nonprofits and other political groups for decades. Most recently, he was a key trainer and organizing strategist for the 2008-2012 presidential campaigns. And many of us, I'm sure, are familiar with the role that organizing played, both kind of as a method and also an approach to what it meant to get out the vote in each of those elections. So why am I telling you this? Marshall Ganz is a guy who's seen his fair share of issue-based advocacy and community organizing efforts. He's worked with and studied all kinds of leaders in these movements. And he defines leadership this way, as you can see on your screen. Leadership is accepting responsibility for engaging others to achieve purpose in the face of uncertainty. It's maybe a little bit different from the way that you might have heard leadership defined in the past. This idea of accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose in the face of uncertainty. So this is the point where I'll ask folks to unmute themselves if you're able to do so. And I'll ask what sticks out to you about this definition. Is this how you think about leadership? Also, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box. But
I'm sorry, isn't this sort of like teaching somebody to fish rather than handing them a fish, making people self-reliant?
yeah, I like that.
I mean, that's me's the idea.
Yeah.
This is Nancy from St. Louis. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I really like this because I'm just about to move from the Vice President of Leadership of Advocacy position into Vice President of Leadership. And I've been trying to find a tagline or a way to clarify to people that leadership doesn't mean just being on the track to be section president, that every function up and down the ladder, and I don't even want to think of it as a ladder, but stuffing the envelopes for the annual campaign even is leadership, because that enables others, the whole group of us, to achieve all of our purposes.
And I will add, I see that Andrea added in the chat that she's a nurse practitioner who worked with children and parents in an advocacy capacity. And she also highlighted this idea of enabling in the face of uncertainty. Andrea, would you like to say more about the uncertainty piece?
Can you hear me if I speak?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. I don't think that people usually think of the word of uncertainty as being connected to leadership, and I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we're already somehow in the what feels like the heat of election season, even though we're still pretty far out and we're starting to hear a lot of answers and not a lot of embracing uncertainty. But I think that's a really important piece. We've mentioned this term organizing now a few times. Joni added that she likes the use of enabling. Thank you. So let's connect our definition of leadership to what it means to organize. So if we can move to the next slide, Rachel, when you're ready. Awesome. So here's a definition for organizing, building off that idea of leadership. Organizing is leadership that enables people to turn the resources they have into the power they need to make the change that they want. And I'll read that again because I know we do have a couple people on the phone. Organizing is leadership that enables people to turn the resources they have into the power they need to make the change that they want. Thoughts on this idea of organizing? What do you think it's getting at when it mentions the resources that we have and how to turn them into power?
Everybody has internal resources. It's just a matter of somebody giving them the courage to use them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this definition is essentially relational, because organizing, it's a practice. It's a thing that we do together. You're entirely right that everyone has internal resources, but organizing looks to pool those resources through relationships to reach achievable goals together. Nancy, I really liked your point about thinking about leadership in an expansive way and an interconnected way in our sections and otherwise. So the first question that an organizer asks when thinking about this definition is not, what is my issue? Because we all have to care about, that we're passionate about, and it's that drive to make the world a better place that keeps us moving when the work really gets hard and we're frustrated and no one's showing up to the meetings and all of that. The first question that an organizer asks is, who are my people? Who are the people that I work in relationship with to pool resources, to identify priorities, and figure out how we can tackle our shared challenges together? Strong relationships are the foundation of any successful organizing effort. And that's not just relationships with politicians, powerful people, wealthy donors. Those relationships are important and can often make the difference between getting an initiative over the finish line. But to get up to that moment right before the finish line, it's really about how we work together and engage all of our members, all of our stakeholders to actually get there. So I'll now turn it back to particularly our folks who are in sections across the country. When you think about the work that you do, who are the people? Who are you engaging with to figure out your priorities and how to build your work? There's no right answer to this. I'm genuinely curious. I know some sections are larger than others, so they may have a stronger membership base. There are a number of members who have brought in their daughters, their sisters. I see Joni smiling. I'm thinking of you, to continue this work across generations. Who are some other people, groups that you work with in setting your priorities? Either other organizations, communities in your area?
I'm in Sarasota on the gun advocacy. We work with the Brady Group and we work with the League of Women Voters who have the same goals that we do for gun safety.
Great. Fantastic. How about in St. Louis? Who do you do a lot of your work with? I think you might be muted, Nancy.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay.
Partly we work in coalition with groups who are single issue groups on issues that we care about. And Planned Parenthood and NARAL would be perfect examples of that. We try whenever possible to work with the communities that are affected by the issues that we're working on. So we work with the state LGBTQ advocacy group a lot. We work with groups that do direct service work to trafficking victims, and sometimes with engaging the victims themselves in some of the advocacy work that we do. Intimate partner violence would be the same story. We had such an interesting experience with working to bring younger women into our section. We just did a focus group with about a dozen millennial women to talk to them about the broad range of what NCJW does. And it was so interesting how many of them said that they were involved already in enough direct service work, but boy, they wanted to dive into that advocacy stuff, which was very exciting to hear.
Yeah, that is incredibly interesting.
And we're seeing a lot of growth in our membership among women who are not Jewish, but are attracted to the really intelligent way that our advocacy programs run around issues that those women care about.
Fantastic. Great. I love that expansive definition of who are our people. Because one thing that I think is really special about NCJW, like you highlighted, is that it is open to and inviting and eager to work closely with all kinds of groups and individuals who may not be Jewish, who may not be women. And that makes all of our voices much, much stronger. Anyone else want to chime in? I know we have some folks that are calling in from other parts of the country.
I will chime in. I apologize for being late to this meeting, so I am reluctant to voice my opinion so early for me. But I think that my people share my values. They may be Jewish values or human rights values. I think that they are willing to do the work, to get informed, and to use the resources that progressive organizations use. They are empathetic people, and they are compassionate and passionate about making change.
That's great. And Eleanor, where are you calling from?
Philadelphia.
Wonderful. That sounds great. I was there last weekend. I had a great time.
City of brotherly love.
Was that a question mark at the end?
Sisterly too.
Lovely. Great. Well, I like the fact that you particularly highlighted these shared values, because often, like I said, our starting point can't be what is my issue, because we get stuck in, it's easy when you have a strong perspective, as I know everyone on this call does. That's one of my favorite things about NCJW. When you have a strong perspective on an issue and what's right, it's often hard to connect with someone who might be a natural ally but looks at things a little bit differently. So starting from what are our shared values, some of which we articulated in the first half of our conversation a couple months ago about what is your vision for a better world, can mean that you're able to expand that circle of who are your people more than you would otherwise. So Rachel, jump in here, but I remember that there were some common themes, particularly around emphasizing equality, the value of all people, ensuring that opportunity is open to all. Anything else that particularly stuck out to you from that conversation?
Yeah, I think you captured it, and I think it was really about creating. I also heard a lot of sort of like creating a shared vision with those around you of equality and justice in your local community, and a lot of there was some focus on the national, like what needs to change in our country, but also a lot of focus on sort of in individual communities, how can we shift things, and what would that look like?
Wonderful, great. So as we're kind of thinking about these visions and these fundamental values, in our relationships with our partners, our members, the folks who we're looking to work with more closely, this is the place where we are most able to live out our values. So for instance, for the folks who really connect with emphasizing equality in our visions, something that did come up was working in solidarity with otherwise disadvantaged communities. And it sounds like, as we were talking about the work that some of our sections are doing, there's some of that engagement that's going on now, which is fantastic. So I'll turn it around and ask, kind of as we think about these values, equality, ensuring that our work is guided by and centered by the experience of those who are most directly impacted. How are you guys putting that work into practice in your relationships? Does it come up in priority setting, in terms of who has the opportunity to speak in a particular setting, who leads a training conversation like this? What does it look like? How do you think about those values in your work? So for instance, I heard mention of doing work particularly around survivors of trafficking and intimate partner violence. How, for the groups that are doing, for the sections that are doing work around those issues, how do you work with folks who have been directly impacted by those experiences? Either directly or through other organizations.
Primarily, we work with victims in those contexts through partnerships with other organizations. And often when our contact is directly with victims, it's because there's some measure that we're either lobbying on or testifying on, and those victims or survivors want to be involved, but they don't have a very high confidence level in how to tell their story, and they certainly don't want to go and do that by themselves. So then that's a really logical partnership for us to take them with us on legislative visits, and especially testifying, because that can just be so impactful for lawmakers to hear directly from the person as opposed to us telling their story. Is that the sort of example that you're looking for?
That's exactly the kind of example, because I hear in that work that you're doing, maybe not explicitly, but to build power by recognizing and supporting folks who have tremendous resources, and having someone by them tell that story or make that visit. It's a way through that relationship to build power together. I think you make a great point as well, that we constantly have to be mindful of supporting others in telling their stories. It is everyone on this call has a reason to do this work. Maybe it's something that you've experienced. Maybe it's the value that guides you to participate in social media. Your voice, your story is incredibly powerful, and through your relationships, you have the capacity to support and enable others, as it was mentioned earlier, in teaching someone to fish, to have the ability to tell their story and achieve shared goals through their power. So thank you for everyone who shared the work that you're doing and the relationships that you are building and cultivating. These principles are, of course, not limited to the type of work that we call organizing, but they can spill out and inform all kinds of different methods of social change. So Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about what this might look like in other contexts?
Sure. And I think we were going to talk about advocacy, and I think, Nancy, the example you brought up of bringing survivors to testify is a really wonderful example of how that can play out. And I think also I was impressed at I was thinking about the opening plenary of the Washington Institute, where we had United We Dreams come, and the survivors from Parkland, and really I thought it was a really beautiful example of, as we're thinking about going into advocacy work or change work, making sure that front and center, literally, and beginning our work together, we are centering those voices. And so I think really that's a wonderful example of, in advocacy, how can we bring those voices together so that even and I also want to include that sometimes, even though I know, many of us are Jews, not all of us necessarily are. And I think sometimes I have experienced in Jewish spaces an assumption that we are not directly experiencing the issue we're lobbying on, that maybe and realizing that actually sometimes we are, that sometimes we have our own stories and we are the directly impacted population. So we need to be in relationship with other groups who experience that, and also recognize within our groups who are the people who how do we lift up our own voices sometimes if we are folks who've directly experienced the issue at hand. And I think advocacy is a really wonderful way in which you can bring in those relationships with impacted groups, either ourselves or others, bring in voices, bring in act in coalition, as it sounds like many of you are doing, so that the lobbying work that you're doing or the advocacy work you're doing can really be amplified. Katie, do you want to talk a little about how this shows up in direct service from what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the folks who were at Washington Institute, one of the bills that we were lobbying on is the Each Woman Act, which would ensure that everyone who needs an abortion is able to get one, regardless of their source of income. At this point, unfortunately, because of the Hyde Amendment and for other reasons, for folks who get their insurance through the federal government, through Medicaid, as federal employees, service members, that insurance doesn't cover abortion. And abortion can be really expensive. So abortion funds exist around the country to help folks who need care, who have an appointment, who may not be able to cover the cost of the procedure out of pocket, to meet the difference between what they can pay for and what the procedure will cost. So this is an example of direct service, of helping people in that moment meet an immediate need for in advancement of a social justice value. The National Network of Abortion Funds, which is kind of the umbrella parent organization for a lot of these funds, also has a program called We Testify, which supports folks who have had abortions to tell their stories, to talk about why they needed the care and the decision that they made to reduce stigma, because the tagline says everyone loves someone who has had an abortion, because we know that 1 in 4 adults will access abortion care in their lifetime. So again, this is an example of both direct service, not just meeting a need as it arises, but building power through storytelling, through relationships to reduce stigma. Does that make sense?
I just want to add, I think one of the things we talked about in the previous webinar, particularly related to direct service, is often direct service, I think in very progressive spaces, we talk about, direct service meets immediate needs. It doesn't change the status quo. It doesn't meet long-term needs. And I think, not to say it's looked down upon, but I think it can be seen as not as impactful in a long term. And I think this is a great example of sort of how do you do direct service in a way that sort of can meet an immediate need and is getting into some of the underlying causes. And obviously recognizing that particularly around abortion care, direct service is crucial and necessary, and meeting those immediate needs is what we can do to help people stay in it for the long haul. And Nancy is talking about being in conversation with the abortion fund folks in St. Louis about providing in-home stays for women who travel there for services. Definitely, in-home stays, yes. Great. I want to talk a little bit about, Akiti, actually, is there anything else you wanted to add on direct service?
No, was there anything that anyone else on the call specifically wanted to say about direct service? Okay.
So I want to talk a little bit about, one of the things we talked about was direct action or social mobilization, of sort of how do we show up physically for one another. Someone brought up a bit earlier, showing up at rallies. And I want to show a brief video, understanding that, technology sometimes is not our friend, but I'm hopefully tested this, hopefully it'll work. So show a quick video of, this is from Avodah, is a series called Speak Torah to Power, in which we invited various rabbis and Jewish leaders to speak about what is their Torah broadly defined in this moment, this political moment. And one of them, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who is the leader of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah here in New York, which is an LGBT synagogue, spoke about one of the initiatives that they did after the election that I think is a great example of showing up and being in deep relationship, in this case with the Muslim community in New York. So I'm going to hopefully show about 3 minutes of this video, and if at any time you can't hear the video, feel free to type in the chat and we can try to do a little bit of tech work. Sorry, 1 second.
Morning after the election, many of us had deep worries about what would happen to this country. The Friday after the election, I woke up and I said to myself, as worried as I feel as a lesbian, as a Jew, as a woman in this America, I wonder how Muslim Americans feel. the person who's just become president of the United States, or just become elected and will be president soon, began his entire campaign to be president by offering a speech that was anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant. He framed his entire candidacy on his anti-Muslim position. And I thought to myself, okay, I feel vulnerable, but how does a Muslim American feel today? And I called a friend of mine who's an imam of a mosque in NYU, and I gathered a few people, and I thought to myself, as a Jew, how would I feel? What would I want from my neighbors at a moment of great anxiety? I'd want people to show up, to show me that they were actually aware of the vulnerability and the anxiety I was feeling as a Jew. So a few of us showed up at the mosque with very simple signs that said, Jewish New Yorkers support our Muslim neighbors. And we got 100 flowers at the flower district, roses, beautiful long stem roses, which, by the way, I've learned since, you don't give out long stem roses with the thorn still on. But I didn't know that then. But so we gave out 100 roses, and as we stood in front of the mosque, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Muslims were coming to prayer that Friday because they were feeling anxious, but they assumed nobody else saw what they were going through then. And we could see as they approached down the street and saw us, they weren't sure. Are we protesters? And you could see the anxiety in their body language and in their faces as they were trying to figure out who we were. And as they read the signs, you could see the smiles break open, and they hugged us and took selfies with us that they wanted to send to their mother in Pakistan or their sister in St. Louis. They were so shocked that non-Muslims showed up just to stand in front of the mosque and do a very inexpensive, easy to organize action of just being there. The imam came out of the mosque and invited me to come in at the end of Jummah prayers to address the community. He invited me, who he knew to be a lesbian rabbi of the gay synagogue, to come into the Muslim community and offer words of support. That began a relationship that we now call House of Peace. And I said to our community, many of whom are here and have done this, if we could have 3 people show up every Friday, can we, starting with the Friday of the inauguration, simply be there? We can't necessarily do everything to transform or change the anti-Muslim energy. Laws, bans, Supreme Court decisions, but we can do something. And that is to show as human beings we cared and we could show up. I learned this from all different things in my tradition. There's no replacement.
I'm going to stop the video there. There's more to see. You can find it, as you can see, on YouTube, and the link will be included in the slides. But I included this because and Sharon actually goes on to talk about how her community has really continued to deepen that relationship. And I think it's a great example of sort of, I was struggling with which method to put it in, because I think there's some amount of sort of direct action showing up. There's also a great amount of education. She goes on to talk about how her community actually didn't know a lot about the Muslim community, and in turn that Muslim community didn't know a ton about a Jewish community, and sort of how this example developed as a means of building a relationship and strengthening both of their communities, and really helped the Jewish community strengthen their Shabbat practice and strengthen their knowledge, as well as being an act of solidarity for the Muslim community in their neighborhood. Oops. So the other piece that Katie and I wanted to touch on, we were trying to think of how do these different methods relate to social change work. And we were trying to think of philanthropy and how do relationships show up in philanthropy work. And it felt challenging, I'm going to be honest, when the 2 of us were preparing, because philanthropy is about a sort of, the power dynamic there is real. One person has money, you're giving it to another. We talked about a few examples of giving circles, of micro lending programs. But we wanted to kind of talk about this because we wanted to, and maybe enter into some conversation here of bringing relationships and really deepening our relationships in change work can be done really well and can be an excellent motivation and can help to nourish and strengthen our work. And it can also be hard. And we want to, we want to acknowledge what is good about this and how it can really amplify our work, and also what can be really challenging about it. Katie, do you have anything you want to add on that, on kind of philanthropy and what can be challenging?
Yeah, I appreciate your naming the power dynamic in particular that can arise in philanthropy, and often, not exclusively in philanthropy, but in all of these methods of social change. I think that when there are a limited amount of resources and you're trying to address a need, relationship building and ensuring that those who are most directly affected by an issue are the ones who are setting the agenda, which can often place those who seek to help, whether it's an NCJW chapter or us as individuals who want to help work on that issue, in a helping capacity as opposed to a leading capacity. That is a way to overcome and challenge head-on that power dynamic of saying, I am here to support you. I am not here because I care about this issue, even though I do, but I'm here to act as a support for you. And in many ways, as we talked about before, that is a type of leadership that builds strong and sustained movements.
So I think we wanted to share those examples as ways to help lift up some examples that you're already doing and that are happening in the world of relationship overlapping with different methods of social change, and wanted to now enter into some conversation for the next 10 minutes or so about how, and I think we've gotten some examples already, but how else have relationships with directly impacted groups helped you achieve your visions as a section? And again, feel free to type in the chat box or enter or unmute yourself and speak up and share some examples of how have you built relationships in your sections, or how might you, or how would you hope to?
I see we have a few folks who have not yet had a chance to share some of the work that that their section is doing. So this is a great place both to also kind of share the amazing projects that you're working on, and to build off that momentum kind of in different locations. So is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to share who'd like to jump in?
Well, I will jump in. This is Eleanor Levy from Philadelphia again. And one opportunity for growing your base of like-minded people is whenever there is a public forum or a section event, I try to reach out to the leadership to point out to me new members and sit with them. I try to look for those who are new to the section or newly jazzed about a specific issue that I care about, so that I can issue a personal invitation to join me in work on that issue. So it's just being forward and proactive and friendly and welcoming, and making it look like it would be cool to serve on a committee with me, or to go to a coalition meeting on that subject, or get involved in a campaign.
That's great. Nancy's trying to recruit you to come and do some of that work in St. Louis, so. you may be traveling sooner than you think. But no, I agree completely. I'm sure we've all been in that situation where you're interested in an organization or an event and you go and you don't know anyone in the room, and as soon as it's over you get up and you run as fast as you can for the door because it's really hard to not know anyone. And so doing that sort of outreach when there's someone new in the room and just going over and introducing yourself, and giving a concrete invitation for a next step to stay engaged, so that way people know how to plug in. Have there been opportunities where other organizations or groups in your area have held events that you have gone to and built up relationships that way? Either for Eleanor or anyone else you'd like to share?
Sure, that happens all the time. And I just got involved in an organization called Sanctuary Suppers that is basically a fundraising experience, but it's held at a different restaurant in a different community with people from that community who are refugees or new immigrants and often struggling or experiencing success after a long period of work and paperwork. But there's a host of other coalition groups that have meetings all the time, and whenever there's some interaction available, I get really excited, so that it's not just a program where you come, you absorb, and you leave.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. I'm curious if anyone has it. I think we've shared some great examples of how relationship building works well. And I know from my own experience, sometimes relationship building is hard. Sometimes, right, you go to the meeting and no one welcomes you in. Or it's hard for you to approach a new person. I'm curious if there are any examples and sort of create in this space of either times where you've tried to build relationships and it hasn't gone as well as you'd like, or others have worked with you and there's been what are some stumbling blocks that might have come up?
So I can share a recent experience along these lines because it is very challenging. So for my role at Interfaith Alliance, I recently went to this committee meeting in the House Judiciary on white nationalism and hate crimes. It got some news coverage because it went a little bit off the rails. But there were a lot of partners who we work with who were in the room, who are strong civil rights advocates, and who have come together from a lot of different perspectives to draw attention to and pressure particularly the Justice Department to take more concrete action around the rise in hate crimes. Unfortunately, during the hearing, there was a real focus on one of the experts who was testifying, who is a doctor who lost 2 of his children in an anti-Muslim hate crime, and questioning him particularly about his faith. And for many of the Muslim folks in the room, that was really, really hard. And as an organization that's an interfaith organization that does a lot of work around anti-Muslim bigotry, I started talking to one of the young women who was sitting next to me kind of about how this was feeling to her and sounding to her. And she was understandably having a really hard time. So we made a plan to get coffee afterward and just talk about it. And that was an opportunity for both of us to decompress and to get to know her a little bit better and build up that relationship. But as a part of something very challenging that we went through together. So there are always those sorts of opportunities, but I think, again, recognizing that shared value, even though we were coming at this work from very different places, and finding a time to strengthen our relationship so we can work better together and support each other was really important.
Thanks, Katie. Is there anyone else who wants to share examples of sort of the good or the hard or the in-between?
This is Eleanor. Would it be possible for Hannah or Ari to share the substance and the ramifications of the oppression workshop on anti-Semitism? Because that, I know, was really hard and divisive.
Are you talking about the one at Washington Institute, presumably?
Yes.
So people had a lot of thoughts about it, and because of that, I'm actually going to table that conversation for now, and I'm happy to follow up with you after to kind of debrief that and to talk about that workshop. I'm sure Lindsay is also happy as the staff lead on there to check in individually, but just because there were a lot of thoughts regarding it, we're going to table that for right now. But thanks for
Well, the reason I bring it up is because whenever you have shared values, they're not going to be 100%. So staying in a hypothetical, non-specific mode, I really like your webinar, Ari, on how to talk about the tough questions, to validate people's different opinions and emotions, and to pivot. Because I think that is one of the hardest things about staying positive, not airing your dirty laundry, and recognizing that there's always going to be differences. We come together with shared issues and values, but also differences. And that to me is the hardest thing of all, as you're showing by not wanting to get into that on this call. Really very, very sensitive, and you know, one of a few issues where any community, including the Jewish community, is very divisive, conflicted, and sort of overshadows a lot of the good work. I don't know if.
Thank you for sharing that, Eleanor. And I think bringing up some of the themes of how relationships can be really powerful and also challenging to build and maintain. And sounds like Ari also maybe has some good insight into that. So I think that's a piece to be continued. And I also know we're getting to our closing time. So I'm going to invite anyone as we're closing, if you have thoughts on next steps you want to take as you continue to build relationships or questions you're asking, to just put those into the chat box so we can get a sense of what people are leaving with. So again, what are you thinking about? What are next steps you might want to take to help as you build relationships? And I want to just invite Katie to share a few closing words before we turn it back over to Ari.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking some time, especially as we're coming right up to the Seders. I know that my house smells like matzo ball soup right now, and it is one of my favorite things about this time of year. But one thing that I did want to bring up is that every year, you know, at the Seders, we sing Dayenu. It would have been enough. And this is one piece of the Seder tradition that has always been a little challenging for me, because of course, any one of those things would not have been enough. That's why the song is so long. But Dayenu calls us to celebrate each step toward freedom, as if it would have been enough. And then we're called to start another step. We don't always know the end to which we are working, but our visioning and our relationship building and our supporting of each other will help us get there. If we reject any step because it is not the whole of liberation, we will never get to that endpoint. So it means that we are called to sing each verse and just as strongly to sing the next one. So as we head into Passover, I urge us to together remember not to stop walking forward, to always sing the next verse. So Dayenu, thank you. And Ari, anything you'd like to leave us with?
Pretty hard to follow that. Thank you, first of all, Rachel and Katie, very much for engaging us in this really interactive conversation. I know that's not always easy over Zoom. And thank you everyone for being able to join us. I know we're out of time. Just a quick reminder, we have next month's webinar will be on the 15th at 1:30 p.m. We are still solidifying the topic, but don't worry, we'll send out an email very soon. And we'll include the slides and recording of this webinar in a follow-up email to come later this week. So thank you again, everyone, for being able to join us, and have a great rest of your afternoons and a happy Passover.
All right.
Bye, thank you.
Guys, thank you.